and let us all do we can to build a better future.
All right, let's really address this thing with RFK Jr. and to some extent Marianne Williamson's campaign facing off against Joe Biden. I understand that there are supporters who want to see RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson go all the way. And to that, no voter shaming, it's fine. But I do want to forewarn you. I've seen this before with the Democratic Party, what they did to Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020. What I urge anyone that's really going to put in their time, effort, and energy, don't invest too much into it. Because unless we really see what either of those two candidates are going to do to really stand up against the DNC and Joe Biden's campaign, be prepared for the disappointment. However, there's one caveat to take away from this. Now, I don't want to build up false hope, but the approval rating of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is constantly falling. Voters, especially those in the vote blue no matter who crowd, are not as enthusiastic about Biden 2024. His age is showing. His inability to lead and solve problems that are impacting millions of Americans are an actual fact. This isn't room for debate. Now, if you are truly going to be going into the Democratic primary thinking that either Marianne Williamson or RFK Jr. are going to go all the way, I'm so sorry, but you're going to get screwed over. However, what I find interesting, though, is that the Biden campaign is doing all it can to dismiss, as is corporate media, doing all they can to dismiss any real challenge to Biden's overall initiatives for his 2024 election. So I want to pull up this article here in regards towards how they're foolish for ignoring RFK Jr. Because as soon as RFK Jr. got into the race, things started to shift and change. Already polling at 20%, that number is exponentially high, especially facing off against an incumbent. And as the entire summer continues to go on by, that number looks like it's going to keep on increasing. So let's talk about it. Biden's a fool to ignore the RFK Jr. campaign. If you happen to see pigs flying the other day, it's because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. visited the New York Post to discuss his challenge to President Joe Biden for the 2024 Democratic nomination. I'll be a serious challenge if the Democratic establishment and its media allies can't quash him. I stuttered on that. Apologies. Kennedy has a real conviction and charisma, and he's fiercely independent of many of his party's reigning pieties, all of which should appeal. For example, he vows, I would seal the border, as the current policy has created a humanitarian death trap, and you can't have a country if you can't protect your borders, to which I got to say, okay, RFK, I hear what you're saying, but does that mean ending regime change wars and sanctions in Central and South America, ending the ridiculous war on drugs? And let's face it, the war on drugs is just like prohibition in the 1930s. It didn't solve a goddamn thing. Prohibition didn't solve a goddamn thing, and the war on drugs cannot be won because who's buying the drugs? Why, it's lovely Mr. and Mrs. America. That's who's buying the drugs. That's just the truth, all right? If you don't like it, too bad. Yet he remains very much a man of the left who would expand legal immigration. He's equally clear. He's equally clear that wildly printing money, as both parties have been doing, creates the illusion that there's no cost to massive federal spending, but is in the end a gift to the rich and a bane to the middle and lower classes. Now, hearing all this, we've talked about how he's able, at least what RFK Jr. is able to do. He is able to really stand up and speak out against the two-party system. In many ways, as much as someone in the establishment can do. I don't want to praise too much for Robert Kennedy Jr., but he's going farther than what Bernie Sanders would ever do. Now, I am going to be bracing myself for the eventual, hi, this is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I'm telling you to endorse Biden. That's something we should all prepare for. But I want to pull up this video from Fox News. Again, shout out to Case Study QB, where they go into a little bit of a further depth in regards towards where this election is going and how Americans view Joe Biden. So let's pull up this video. And again, shout out to Case Study QB. As I've said before, he's wrongly being censored on Twitter. Please support his YouTube page and Odyssey page as well. Hey, Elon Musk, help out Case Study QB if you can.
The president's campaign just released its first strategy memo, and it is quite revealing where the ad buys are. It's boasting a number of viable pathways to 270 electoral votes. Team Biden's dropping a seven-figure early ad buy in blue wall swing states, including Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. You can see the other early ad buy states in here: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida among them. That campaign is highlighting Wisconsin, where abortion rights just swung the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court left. Democrats think that's a sign that the social and culture issues will help Biden in some of these perennial swing.
Okay, it's social and cultural issues. All right, let's talk about a big social and cultural issue. All right, and especially to the women who watch this show too. Under the Biden-Harris administration, Roe v. Wade died, a woman's right to choose. I think that's a major issue, and I think we all can remember how so many activists were saying that they would be flooding the streets nonstop to protect a woman's right to choose, and that didn't happen. Biden, the Democrat, Roe v. Wade died. And not to mention, a little girl south of the border, probably, and, again, this story's getting a lot of frontline news, but a little girl south of the border died in U.S. Border Patrol custody. That's probably not the first one, nor will it be the last, but hey, DSA, social justice warriors, AOC, are you going to go south of the border? Probably not. They're not going to do that. They won't. They don't want to upset the image of the Democrats. And again, Biden's campaign strategy is to go to these states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, Nevada. I believe we got Georgia there as well. To our viewing audience, if you live in those said states that I just named out, what's the overall feel towards Biden and Harris in your community? Type in the comment section below.
States and count more than the economy. But finally, one editorial in the New York Post pointing out Biden is a fool to ignore RFK Jr. At least 3 different polls have him up around 20%, John. And obviously that is not to be ignored this far out still from the presidential election.
Well, yeah, that's true. But, as we pointed out in one of our panels, Biden still got 62%, which ain't half bad.
Yeah, ain't half bad, but that's not good either. We're looking at an incumbent president that's being challenged. We're looking at an incumbent president standing at 62%. If he was so fantastic, if he was so great, those numbers would be higher. Now, to be clear, again, this is a sad part about a lot of Americans, and that is we're not actively involved in politics until the last minute or when we're forced to care. Now, I know many of you are burnt out by electoral politics, so again, we have to look at about the number of people that were polled and asked who they would prefer, Biden or RFK Jr. But even if it is such a minimal amount of people, 62%, that's astronomically pathetic. And RFK Jr., his polling is rising up. It cannot be ignored. And already Bernie Sanders and a couple other heavy hitters in the Congressional Progressive Caucus, whatever that means, threw their support behind Biden. So already their support is there, and it's still not enough. RFK Jr. at 20%, and that number is rising higher.
This is true.
If you're running for the nomination. But a lot to chew over between now and next January, and then from January on through the primary season, and then into November. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
What the commentators are not talking about, notice I didn't call them journalists, but the commentators, the talent at Fox News are not talking about, and that is, again, a lot can happen between now and next year. I keep saying this, and I want it to be drilled into all your heads. And all of you have to do the due diligence to be aware of it too. But prepare yourselves to see numerous other videos of Biden either being brushed aside, pushed real quickly so he's not speaking as much. Because the more Biden speaks, the more people see that there's something wrong. They can't hide it forever. Sooner or later, Biden's going to have some kind of accident, some kind of stutter, some kind of sign where it's really going to be evidently clear, and in my opinion, it is, that he is not mentally fit for office. Corporate media can do all it can to have a weekend at Biden's, but they can't fix this image. I want to pull up this video that was played on the post-duopoly show with duopoly show. Yeah, I like saying that. Duopoly, the post-duopoly show with RBN and Due Dissidents. We played this in regards towards Dennis Kucinich, who is now becoming Robert Kennedy Jr.'s campaign manager. Again, shout out to Case Study QB. Now, I don't know how much more push Dennis can do to really help out RFK Jr., knowing for the fact that the DNC commits election fraud and will rig the primary to work in favor for Biden or whoever the establishment wants. But again, this can lead RFK Jr. to become more of a significant challenge to the DNC and Biden. Now, to be clear here, again, super delegates closing down polling stations, that's a fact that they're going to have to deal with. And if Dennis is unprepared for that, then you're wasting your time if you're supporting either Marianne Williamson's campaign or RFK Jr.
Joe Biden's biggest Democrat challenger, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is holding steady at around 20% support amongst Democrat voters in the latest primary polls.
And former Ohio Congressman Dennis Kucinich is officially coming out of political retirement as RFK taps him for campaign manager.
Dennis Kucinich joins us now with more from the trail. Dennis, great to see you this morning. Glad to have you on the program.
Wow. It's great to be with you. And hello, Bob.
Good morning to you. Tell us, okay, you're running the campaign from RFK Jr. As you guys see it, what's the path? How do you see the lane for RFK Jr. to step in and win the Democratic nomination over Joe Biden?
I think not just Democrats, but I think all Americans are waiting to be united, to put aside all the divisions that have plagued our country in so many years. And Robert F. Kennedy is a unity candidate. He's somebody who has the capacity to reach out and heal the divides which have tormented our country and have separated us, liberal, conservative, right, left, Democrat, Republican. We now have a candidate in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. who has the capacity to take America to the highest octave and to heal all these divides. So, I mean,
now, okay, it's one thing. Obviously, you have to hype up your political candidate who's running for office. And to be clear here, the people who I've spoken to who are in support for RFK Jr. are not just traditional Democratic voters. I've seen and talked to people who are Republican voters, libertarians, Greens, and yes, surprisingly, even some socialists too. I know there's a couple of people who are on board for RFK Jr. They like his message. They like that he's not following in line with the typical Democratic establishment narrative. But again, he's running in the Democratic Party. Now, the Biden campaign is definitely foolish for ignoring the calls for debates and ignoring the significant challenge that RFK Jr. can pose to his campaign. I mean, it's absolutely foolish. And when you ignore a candidate that has the ability to bring in outside voters to maybe potentially vote in a Democratic primary, that will significantly damage you in the general election. Because the whole idea of politics is to, again, convince voters that you were the best candidate. But as we spoke up on yesterday's live stream with on RBN, Due Dissidents as well, again, the Democratic primary, majority of Democratic voters are not that bright. Not that bright, especially when it was those who want to vote blue no matter who because they're so triggered by Trump. And so when you have a primary that's not only filled with people who are easily turned into sheep, but also a fact where there's cheating, and again, the DNC already has who they want behind closed doors as their pick, you are truly wasting your time in the Democratic Party. And there must be, and there has to be a need for a real third party and independent campaign run. And that's something that we are not really hearing much from RFK Jr. and definitely not from Marianne Williamson. The Democratic primary is a place where you're going to lose unless somehow out of the blue there's a huge amount of voter enthusiasm for either RFK Jr. or what remains of Marianne Williamson's campaign. This is a sad state of affairs in American politics, and while I do respect Dennis's talk in regards towards what RFK Jr. can do and who is falling for his campaign and wanting to throw their support behind it, unless you're really going to start a fight, and I mean a real fight that will have voters go ahead and also invest in the fight as well, please don't tell me how this campaign is going to change things. Now, again, his campaign is a serious threat, but again, you're in the Democratic primary. You're not going to win in the Democratic primary. Bernie Sanders allowed his movement to die in the Democratic primaries of 2016 and 2020. These are not opinions. These are facts. That's what happened.
I think the path is one that is how people feel about him. If people like him, people have a sense of history about him, and they trust him.
Yeah, you know, that's one of the things I've always liked about you too, Dennis. I've always felt, I don't agree with many of your positions, all of your positions, but I've always felt like you were an honest broker, and I feel the same way about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. That said, you talk about this divide. I think Americans are coming together on a lot of issues that the establishment Republicans don't admit and the Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton warmonger group don't admit, and that is on peace. RFK Jr. and Donald Trump, that, you know, two prominent candidates on both sides of the aisle, both agree that the war in Ukraine, for example, is something that we shouldn't be involved in. We can bring Americans together on that.
I would agree. And, you know, of course, looming behind that is the danger of expanding war, is the danger of World War III. And it appears that the people who are making these decisions right now are not really mindful of the great threat that that is in the background if we do not find a way to resolve this. And diplomacy is something that not just myself, but Mr. Kennedy understands. He wants America's role in the world to be cooperative. He doesn't want to be rattling sabers. He understands the cost in human life and the cost to the American budget. The other thing, you had this story a little bit earlier about the FBI spying on people. Mr. Kennedy is totally opposed to that kind of an approach.
Okay. Again, things I like to hear. You know, what RFK Jr. and to some extent Trump have in common, even though RFK is probably able to articulate it better than Trump, both want the war in Ukraine to end. People, to quote Trump, I want people to stop dying. I want people to stop dying, which is an admirable trait coming from Trump, of all people. Whether how authentic that is yet to be seen. But then also for the fact calling out the FBI as well. Edward Snowden warned us that the NSA and other government agencies are spying in on us. Numerous other whistleblowers, activists, journalists, commentators have said the same thing too. And to his extent, Trump and RFK Jr.'s campaigns are explicitly saying these things. Now, that's a big no-no in CNN and MSNBC and the DNC and the greater DNC establishment. But how often do we hear people talk like this? Now, again, anyone running in the Democratic Party, Republican Party, they could say things and probably get away with it. Whether there's any follow-through, that's the big question. Because we know that the influence of the military-industrial complex, big pharma, again, the surveillance state, they all have power. They all have agency over our politicians. Our politicians do not fight for us. Now, if we do get somebody in office that will fight for us, be it a president, what exactly will this president do? Because they will be alone, theoretically. Congress, the Senate and House are filled with vipers, people who are very opportunistic, people who only have their self-image as their number one concern. And that means getting the people involved. But the real truth is, we don't need these politicians to rule over us or dictate policy over us. It's always been us. It's been our choice. We just forgot. We allowed the corporate media and the two-party system to tell us that they have control and they have our best interests at heart. which has never, ever been the case.
When he's elected, there won't be the spying. The freedom of speech will be protected. Freedom of religion will be protected. He is the kind of leader who has the capacity to look at the deeper emotional and spiritual needs of the country as well, and say, look, let's reclaim what it means to be an American, and let's include all of us in that, not just one party, but all of us.
Congressman, in order to get to that point, you got to win the Democrat nomination. He surprised a lot of people coming out of the gates at 20%, including the Biden camp. But they're going to play the freeze-out, blockout game. They're not going to want him.
For one point in time, I'm glad Fox and Friends is actually bringing up that question. I know this is how we are in the depths of despair when Fox and Friends talks about what the DNC will do
on the stage, included in the part of the process. How do you fight to get your candidate in the mix amongst the DNC, which is effectively closed ranks around Joe Biden?
The American people are going to decide this election, not an alphabet organization. And the American people are wise, they are perceptive. It's one of the reasons why Mr. Kennedy's campaign is catching on. And frankly, to have access to the Fox network is very important to our campaign. But we're open to hearing from all the others as well.
And to which I have to say, Dennis, since you're his campaign manager, bring RFK Jr. onto all independent media. Jimmy Dore, RBN, Hardlands Media, Due Dissidence. Hell, go on the Joe Rogan show. I know he's been on Russell Brand's show, but he needs to go on all independent media, do numerous independent town halls. Corporate media has definitely made it clear. They've done some segments saying there's no debates. Now, they're not going to force that issue, but town halls, that's the key. He's going to have to create a strong online presence and reach out to numerous independent commentators, not just only on the left or in the Democratic Party, but conservatives and libertarians too. He's going to have to do that. If he doesn't, well, then we'll see what happened. The same thing that happened to Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020, and RFK Jr. will be steamrolled. I'm not expecting much from this primary. I am impressed at the numbers that RFK Jr. and his campaign are able to do and how far his message is reaching out to voters. The Biden campaign is completely foolish for dismissing this threat because I have this gut feeling that 2024 will be a repeat of 2016. Everyone's saying, oh, our candidate, the Democratic candidate's just fine. He has what it takes, and then lose to a reality TV show clown named Donald Trump. This will happen. History will repeat itself, but perhaps maybe we need to hear from you, the people. So I want to ask all of you this. It's democracy in the chat. I know, controversial statement. What the hell is democracy? I'm going to give you guys a choice. Do you think that the Biden campaign... Hold on. Let me rephrase that. Let me rephrase this. Do you think that RFK Jr.'s campaign has what it takes to go all the way to challenge Biden and the DNC to win? Type 1 for yes. I believe that this can be done. We can overcome the DNC, the establishment, the super delegates. It can be done. Type 1 if you think that it really can be done. This campaign has momentum to inspire a political movement. Type 2 for no. This will not happen. We're going to see RFK Jr. endorse Biden. I want to hear from all of you and your thoughts. Now, again, let's keep our conversation civil as much as we can. I understand that there are many people who really go to bat for a politician. But I say this to everyone. Do not waste your full time into these politicians, because if they can and will crap in your hat. Simple as that.